Errors of procedure. 1. Based consideration of evidence. One form of this error is seeking evidence that confirms your bias and ignoring evidence that challenges it. Another is interpreting evidence in a way that favors your bias. Another is interpreting evidence in a way that favors your bias. To avoid this error, begin your investigation by seeking out individuals whose view oppose your bias. Then go on to those whose view support it. Also choose the most reasonable interpretation of the evidence. 1. Based consideration of evidence. One form of this error is seeking evidence that confirms your bias and ignoring evidence that challenges it. Another is interpreting evidence in a way that favors your bias. To avoid this error, begin your investigation by seeking out individuals whose views oppose your bias. Then go on to those whose views support it. Also choose the most reasonable interpretation of the evidence. 2. Double standard. Using one set of criteria for judging arguments, we agree with another standard for judging arguments we disagree with. To avoid this error, decide in advance what judgment criteria you will use and apply those criteria constantly, regardless of whether the data in question support your view. 2. Double standard. Using one set of criteria for judging arguments, we agree with another standard for judging arguments we disagree with. To avoid this, using one set of criteria for judging arguments we agree with and another standard for judging arguments we disagree with. To avoid this error, decide in advance what judgment criteria you will use and apply those criteria constantly, regardless of whether the data in question support your view. 刘静文啊，除了玩这个，还有6万多种方法可以继续不写作业。啊，你不要觉得你一会儿你到时候会写的，不会，你到时候剩下时间少了，你会着急的。啊，你的脑子会让你会光用来着急，还是不会用来写，知道吗？到时候你到那个时候啊，你不光会和自己着急，你还会和我们着急的。啊，你的脑子还会指挥你过来告诉我怎么写。你已经试过无数次了，刘静文，不要试到6万多次，试到6万多次，你试出所有的都不行了的时候，你就老了，你就老成那样了。啊，这就我说的，刘静文。啊，你二年级的时候，你的脑子就让你这么想，你就信，所以你没有考上，都没有考100分，每一个都留一点点遗憾。你永远没有机会2年级再考双百了。你2年级没考上，你肯定你的脑子告诉你，我明年好好考。你从3年级一直到现在，你哪一天未好好考认真过啊？你已经又用了1个学期的时间，你的脑子又让你耗过了1个学期的时间，没有让你好好考了，你还在这听。 你再继续，刘静文，到今年考试仍然是那样。考完了以后，你永远不可能在3年级的上学期考个满分了。你老了，你知道吗？你相对于1年级，你已经老了2岁了。就是因为你每时每刻都在选容易的事儿，容易的事一大把一大把的啊。比如说站在那儿，站吧。3. Hasty conclusion. A premature judgment that is a judgment made without sufficient evidence. To avoid drawing a hasty conclusion, identify all possible conclusions before you select any one. Then decide whether you have sufficient evidence to support any of those conclusions, and if so, which conclusions that is. Hasty conclusion, a premature judgment that is to a judgment made without sufficient evidence. To avoid drawing a hasty conclusion, identify all possible conclusions before you select any one. Then decide whether you have sufficient evidence to support any of those conclusions, and if so, which conclusion that is. For overgeneralization and stereotyping. Overgeneralization and stereotyping. Overgeneralization is ascribing to all the members of a group of quality that fits only some members. Overgeneralization is ascribing to all the members of a group a quality that fits only some members. A stereotype is an overgeneralization that is rigidly maintained. To avoid these errors, resist the argument to force individual people, places, and things into hard categories, and keeping in mind that the more limited your experience, the more modest your assertion should be. And keep in mind that the more limited your experience, the more modest your assertion should be. 5. Oversimplification. Oversimplification goes beyond making complex ideas easier to grasp. It twists and distorts the idea. Instead of informing people, oversimplification misleads them. To avoid this error, refuse to adopt superficial views and make a special effort to understand issues in their complexity. 5. Oversimplification. Oversimplification goes beyond making complex ideas easier to grasp. It twists and distorts the idea. Instead of informing people, oversimplification misleads them. To avoid this error, refuse to adopt superficial views and make a superficial effort to understand issues in their complexity. 6. Post hoc fallacy. This error is rooted in the idea that when one thing occurs after another, it must be a result of the other, when in reality the sequence may be coincidental. To avoid the post hoc fallacy, withhold judgment of a cause and effect relationship until you have ruled it out other possible causes, including coincidence. Post-policy fallacy. This error is rooted in the idea that when one thing occurs after another, it must be a result of the other, when in reality the sequence may be coincidental. To avoid the post-hoc fallacy, this error is rooted in the idea that when one thing occurs after another, it must be a result of the other, when in reality the sequence may be coincidental. To avoid the post hoc fallacy, withhold judgment of a cause and effect relationship until you have ruled out other possible causes, including coincidental. Error of expression. 1. Contradiction. To claim that a statement is both true and false at the same time in the same way. To avoid this error, mentor what you say and write. The moment you detect any inconsistency, examine it carefully. Decide whether it is explainable or whether it constitutes a contradiction. If it is a contradiction, revise your statement to make it consistent and reasonable. 1. Contradiction. To claim that a statement is both true and false at the same time in the same way. To avoid this error, monitor what you say and write. The moment you detect any inconsistency, examine it carefully. Decide whether it is explainable or whether it constitutes a contradiction. If it is a contradiction, revise your statement to make it consistent and reasonable. Consistent. 2. Argue in a circle. Attempting to prove a statement by repeating it in a different form. To avoid this error, check your arguments to be sure you are offering genuine evidence and not merely repeating your claim. 2. Arguing in a circle. Attempting to prove a statement by repeating it in a different form. Attempting to prove a statement by repeating it in a different form. To avoid this error, check your arguments to be sure you are offering genuine evidence and not merely repeating your claim. 3. Meaningless statement. A statement in which the reasoning presented makes no sense. To avoid this error, check to be sure that the reason you offer to explain your thoughts and actions really do explain them. 3. Meaningless statement. A statement in which the reasoning presented makes no sense. To avoid this error, check to be sure that the reasons you offer to explain your thoughts and actions really do explain them. Meaningless statement. A statement in which the reasoning presented makes no sense. To avoid this error, check to be sure that the reason you offer to explain your thoughts and actions really do explain them. 4. Mistaken authorities. ascribing authority to someone who does not possess it. To avoid this error, check to be sure that all the sources you cite as authorities possess expertise in the particular subject you are writing or speaking about. Mistaken authority. Ascribing authority to someone who does not possess it. To avoid this error, check to be sure that all the sources you cite as authorities possess expertise in the particular subject you are writing or speaking about. 5 Fields analogy. Analogy is an attempt to explain something relative unfamiliar by referring to something different but more familiar seen. In effect, this is like that. A false analogy claims similarities that do not withstand scrutiny. To avoid this error, test your analogies to be sure that the similarities they claim are real and reasonable, and that no important dissimilarities exist. 5 False analogy. An analogy is an attempt to explain something relatively unfamiliar by referring to something different but more familiar, seen in effect. This is like that. A false analogy claims similarity that do not withstand scrutiny. To avoid this error, test your analogies to be sure that the similarity they claim are real and reasonable, and that no important dissimilarities exist. An analogy is an attempt to explain something relatively unfamiliar by referring to something different by more familiar, seen in effect. This is like that. A false analogy claims similarities that do not withstand scrutiny. To avoid this error, test your analogies to be sure that the similarities they claim are real and reasonable, and that no important dissimilarities exist. 6. Irrational appeal appeals to emotion, tradition, moderation, authority, common belief, and tolerance may be either rational or irrational. They are irrational and therefore unacceptable when they are unreasonable in this particular situation under discussion and or when they discourage thought. To avoid this error, make sure your appeals complement thought rather than substitute for it. Appeals to emotion, tradition, moderation, authority, common belief, to tolerance may be either rational or irrational. They are irrational and they are unacceptable when they are unreasonable in a particular situation under discussion and or when they discourage thought. To avoid this error, make sure your appeals complement thought rather than substitute for it. Errors of a reaction. 1. Automatic rejection, the refusal to give criticism of your ideas. A fair hearing. To avoid this error, think of your ideas as possession that you can keep or discard rather than as extensions of your ego. This will make you less defensive about them. 1. Automatic rejection, the refusal to give criticism of your ideas or behaviors a fair hearing. To avoid this error, think of your ideas as possessions that you can keep or discard rather than as extensions of your ego. This will make you less defensive about them. To changing the subject abruptly at deceptively turning a discussion away from the issue under discussion. To avoid this error, face difficult questions head on rather than trying to avoid them. Changing the subject abruptly and deceptively turning a discussion away from the issue under the discussion. To avoid this error, face difficult questions head on rather than trying to avoid them. 3. Shifting the burden of proof. Shifting the burden of proof, demanding that others disprove our assertions. To avoid this error, understand that the burdens of supporting any assertion rests with the person who makes it rather than the one who questions it. Accept the responsibility of supporting your assertion. 4. Straw man. To commit the error of straw man is to put false words in someone else's mouth and then expose their fallacy, conveniently forgetting that the other person never said them. To avoid this error, be scrupulously accurate in quoting or paraphrasing other people's words. Straw man. To commit the error of straw man is to put false words in someone else's mouth and then expose their falsity, conveniently forgetting that the other person never said them. To avoid this error, be scrupulously accurate in quoting or paraphrasing other people's word, scruping peerlessly. Five, attacking the critic. Attempting to discredit an idea or argument by disparaging the person who expressed it. To avoid attacking the critic, focus your critical things on ideas rather than on the people who express them. Attempting to discredit an idea or argument by disparaging the person who expressed it. To avoid attacking the critic, focus your critical thinking on ideas rather than on people who express them. Goaded, downing, prohibitive, with allergy. Goaded, downing, prohibitive. Prohibitive 难以承受的 with allergy tirade